It's Monday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We've got former Steeler Arthur Moats. It's going to be an exciting show. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button on our channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our breaking news updates and our bonus episodes. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by betonline.net. BetOnline is the number one place to get all your sports betting information. They have you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Joining me today, as I said before, Arthur Moats, the body 52. If you are looking for his Twitter handle, Moats, what's up, baby?
Man, we living the dream. Always good to see you, baby. How we living over there?
We doing great. We doing great. We got 2/3 of the Migos in the house.
Hey, Mama.
Right, Mama. Our man Wes Euler, he was not left off of Bad and Bougie, but he's not on this show. We might have him on later in the week. But Moats, I wanted to get to talk to you. You know, you do Steeler Nation Radio all through training camp, or not training, all through minicamp and OTAs. Yeah. So, you know, we can't say we see on the field, but you got a sense to be around the team, and you've heard the things that the players are saying. I think the biggest thing is there's a lot of excitement for the talent that's there. Everyone's excited about George Pickens, Najee Harris, Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, the defense, Devin Bush, Miles Jack, Minka, even though he's not practicing full weight or talking about how he's going to be ready. There's a lot of excitement across the air. But I think what there's not a lot of talk about yet, because we don't know how things are going to play out, is where does this team need to add? They have over $21 million in cap space now due to Stephon Tuitt's retirement, which means they can use that money. Omar Khan now has a good amount of space to get to work on. If there was one spot, and we're going to talk about more than just one spot, but if there was one spot on this team that you would use money to fix right now, Arthur Moats, what would it be?
Now, why does it always have to be one spot? You always want to put this pressure on me, man. We're supposed to be over here having a good time. Hey, man, can I get multiple choice? No, I didn't get multiple choice with you. I didn't get 50-50. You're somebody that's daily on just one. That's the Pittsburgh Steelers we talk about here. Man, come on, man. I got multiple areas where I could say, hey, you know what? We can look at that spot. We can check out this spot over here. Maybe we need to do a combination of both right here. But that's for another day. Since you want to put the pressure on,
we're going to get to more spots. I just want to know your top one.
If I had to pick a top, what if I don't have a top? What if it's a 1A and a 1B? How can I get a 1A and a 1B? Okay, all right, fair enough. For me,
you are so silly. First of all, this video talk about pressure. You played in the NFL. You played in the playoffs. You've literally competed. You've done all this stuff before. And you gonna say I'm putting pressure on a podcast.
Yeah, it's way harder. It's way harder. But honestly, I do feel like the low-hanging fruit would be to say D-line, right? Because obviously with Stephon Tuitt officially retiring, it just makes sense to say, well, you know, how are we going to replace that guy in-house right now? But honestly, to me, I think the one position that I would still look to add to is the RB2 spot, because right now there still is a lot of question marks around there. We know with Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland, they haven't really lived up to the expectations that we had on them since they've been drafted for various reasons. Yes. But when I think of Najee's workload a year ago, and hearing him say that, hey, the team plans on lightening his load in some capacity, well, that sounds good on paper, but I personally know Coach Tomlin, and he doesn't lighten loads if he doesn't feel he has somebody that can go in there and still do a legitimate job at that position. And we really haven't seen that consistently. Benny Snell has flashed at times, but he's also had some moments where we're left scratching our head or just desiring more. Anthony McFarland, with his health, it hasn't really been something that we can rely on as much as we would like to. So as I continue to think about Najee and preserving him in a sense, but at the same time, being able to still have somebody that can come in there and be that D'Angelo Williams, can be that LeGarrette Blount in a situation, can be that James Conner in a situation. We need that number two. We need that guy that you can, you know, take some of the load off of that number one guy. And right now, I just don't know if we really have that, especially when you're evaluating these guys in the mini camp and OTA setting. Shirts and shorts. it's hard to see how well this guy's picking up blitz pickup. It's hard to see how he's running through arm tackles, if he really made that guy miss or not. But obviously you have time. So I still don't think that you address it today. I personally would like to give you some time in training camp where you get those pads on and you see how these younger guys have developed, whether you're talking about a Mateo Durant or a Warren from Oklahoma State. And you can see, okay, if any of those guys give you a glimpse of hope that you think they're able to be that RB2, well, then you hold off and you don't mess with it. But at that 2-week part, when you got the pads on, if you still don't feel convinced, I think you really have to pull the trigger there if you really want to preserve Najee and allow him to have longer than a 3-year career in the NFL.
No, I agree with that sentiment, and I also think you bring interesting perspective into this because you joined the Steelers in 2014, and so you saw Le'Veon Bell's like breakout year when everyone was like, oh, so he's a bad dude, and then you saw the next year when he went down and how D'Angelo Williams became a huge part of the offense, and you guys got on a roll, made the playoffs, beat the Bengals in the playoffs, almost beat the Broncos in the playoffs, who eventually went on to win the Super Bowl. So you bring an interesting perspective there. I do think backup running back's important. You know, Benny Snell is a guy who you've seen that he's grown. Like, he's not the same guy that he was when he came into the league. He's gotten better, but the Steelers, they don't, they're in a position where they need to know if their number 2 is someone they can rely upon, because Najee Harris looks like a superstar in the he was a star last year. He looks like he could take it to the next level. Kevin Dotson even told me that he felt that if the offensive line was better last year, he thought Najee Harris would have been a 2,000-yard back. So that's the kind of confidence this team has in him. But even with your 2,000-yard backs, you need that backup guy. If you have Le'Veon Bell, it helps to have a D'Angelo Williams. That's why they went and got a Garrett Blount later, and even though that didn't work out for them, but I get your feeling there, and backup running back is a place there. But I look at the money available, and I just say, like, man, $21 million, you could get a really, really, really good star, like someone that's costing somebody about $15 million this year, a corner, a safety. I go back to the cornerback position, and I look at this, and listen, there's excitement around Ahkello Witherspoon being back. Cam Sutton's your reliable guy that's been around. Levi Wallace got ranked as the 8th best cornerman or coverman by CBS Sports last week. And he's just a guy that you just signed in free agency. There's excitement about that. And then you still have Trey Nord and Arthur Moats working in the slot. But Stephon Tuitt left a talent gap, not just a gap in a void in the defensive line, but overall production as far as a dangerous X factor type of player on defense. And I know, Moats, you love to talk about defense.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I guess I think for some people, they're so fixated on the defensive line. Talk about how this team could find different ways to add to this defense that it would cost money. It would even cost picks, but it would still be the kind of influx that can still help the team, even if it's not directly where Tuitt was.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, man. When you talked about the cornerback situation, that could help in the Tuitt situation, because of when you don't have necessarily the elite interior passers that you would want when you're talking about pairing Cam and Tuitt. Well, that means you're going to have a little bit of a drop off there. So what you do to offset that is make sure you have higher end coverage guys. We know we have Minka Fitzpatrick on the back end. He's proven he's all world. We know we have Terrell Edmonds, who is still a really good player in this league. And we feel confident in our corners, but you might be saying, hey man, we need that number 1 corner, that true proven guy that we feel very confident in and has already shown that they can be cornerback 1 over a duration of a season, not for parts of it. Bringing in a guy like that would ultimately alleviate some of the loss of Tuitt, because I still feel like when you talk about Chris Wormley, when you talk about Isaiah Loudermilk, I think that both of those guys played really well last year. And in terms of working together in a tandem, I thought they really helped ease the load, ease that burden of not having Tuitt and Tyson, mind you. Whereas when we think about this season, Tyson's coming back, but I'm also excited about DeMarvin Leal. And granted, he's a rookie, so I'm not putting lofty expectations on him. I'm not even expecting him to be the starter by midseason. But if you're using him in concert with Chris Wormley and Isaiah Loudermilk, now in that three-man rotation, I think that you get a lot of talent. You got a lot of athleticism. You have different things that ultimately equal up to what a Stephon Tuitt is in his own right. But that's another way that you can ultimately offset that loss of Tuitt and still get by without having to necessarily say, hey, we're signing a D lineman right now. You can still, like I said, go with that cornerback position and still feel fine in terms of mitigating that loss of Tuitt.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely different ways to address this on offense and defense. We're going to keep talking about this subject in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast because Arthur Moats has a lot of great thoughts on this. But before we do that, I have to talk to you guys about BlueNile.com. Whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Blue Nile has simple online tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring, and each ring is one of a kind. Looking for fine jewelry but having trouble choosing? Well, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7. They're available by phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Sports listeners will get a $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement rings, so be sure to use the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On, all one word. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress free and find your forever piece at BlueNile.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter with our guest, former Steeler, Arthur Moats. Moats, we're talking about different needs that this team had. You brought up the running back position and the backup running back position. And part of what you said, though, I thought was very interesting with Benny Snell and not knowing how much have you progressed in pass protection. And I will say, Benny Snell improved in pass protection. You know, he's still
100%.
He's still not the full 100% running back that you want all the time. Like, he's not a guy that another team would trade for and say, hey, he's our starter right now. But he shows you, hey, on a passing down, you need Najee to get a break, I'm here, and I can pick up the blitz, and that's important. Anthony McFarland, I think, is in a rough spot. Because he's been injured and, he has to show he's a smaller back, so he has to prove that he can do that. But it made me think back to some of the things that I've been hearing from Miles Jack, DeMarvin Leal, Kevin Dotson, Kendrick Green. All of them are saying the same thing: is they just want the pads on because they get it. They know that they got to go through these motions, they got to go through these drills, these exercises, mentally think through all these different things, learn the playbooks, learn the adjustments, build chemistry with teammates. But there's still that anxiousness of the month and a half lull that you have before you could put the pads on and hit your competition to make the team and make the starting spots. Moats, what's it like? Like, how do you balance that as a player? How do you train yourself to get ready for that moment when there really is no other way to train going up against 90 dudes on a roster and you're all hitting each other?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's the gift and the curse. Sometimes you're extremely excited about it, but then the other time, man, you'll feel anxious. You'll feel sick to your stomach sometimes because you know what the expectation is. You know what lies ahead in terms of the physicality, the beating you're going to take from a physical and mental standpoint. But you also know that, hey, man, we got to go through this if we want to reach the end goal, which is the confetti, getting a Lombardi. So you take this whole process and you put it as almost like objectives, little checkpoints along the way. So you say, hey, I know OTAs, I can't hit, I can't show you the physical, part of my game. So what do? I focus on my footwork. I focus on my hand placement. I make sure that I'm extremely crisp and I'm 100% accurate on my assignments, on my alignment, on all the little detail, all the little intangibles that when you watch it, the casual viewer doesn't notice this. But as the player, you say, hey, I'm going to make sure I'm clean with all this because I don't have pads on. But you know in your mind the plays that you're making. You know in your mind the blocks you made. You know when you've gotten beat. You know when you might have ran a guy over or missed a tackle. And now when training camp hits and you're able to put those pads on, everything that I just talked about, all those little details that we've been working on at OTAs, now you're taking that same thing, but you're just finishing it. Instead of me running 100% and then I get to you, I break down and I stop and ease on by. Now I'm going to get my head across you, put my shoulder pads on your waistline, wrap up and drop my feet. So you take all those similar things and now you just implement it on a play in, play out basis. But it's important to understand that, hey, you can't put these pads on and lose your mind either. Because you have the other guys that mentally, they just don't understand how to control themselves. And that's the thing with professional sports. It's not always about being high energy. Sometimes you have to understand how to control it. You have to understand how to think in the middle of these high pressure, high situation, high intensity situations. And the guys that are able to slow their thinking down, able to slow their breathing down and go through those fundamentals, make sure that they're playing with excitement, playing with passion, but not doing stuff that can jeopardize your technique, not doing stuff that will jeopardize your health, or more importantly, do stuff that'll get flagged to jeopardize the team. So you figure all those things out and you do that balance, but that's ultimately how you prepare for these moments, especially getting ready for training camp. And ultimately you get to training camp. That's what you have to do on a day in a day out basis to, number one, make the team, but then number two, ultimately help this team win a championship.
I agree. It's such a huge part of this and trying to understand those moments. Because again, you could come into it, and I think there's a lot of people that come into it like, you know what? I don't know what to think. So I'm just going to come into this high energy, give this everything I got. And then eventually you're like, okay, bring the high energy, but look for things. Like know what to look for. Like there are certain keys to read. Go ahead.
Yeah, because we talk about the difference between being a hard worker and being a skilled worker. We say they're two different things. We've seen plenty of hard workers. They'll be the guys that are out there 2-3 hours after practice running extra sprints. They're out here, oh man, let me just work on this part. And it's like, that's cool, but what skill are you trying to develop? Right. If you don't understand why you are working, if you don't have a goal in mind, then you're just being a hard worker, but you're not developing skill. It's plenty of hard workers in America. You drive by, you see the construction workers. They are very, very hard at work. But in terms of the skill, that's not the architect. That's not the person that's designing it. That's not the person that's saying, hey, this is what you need and all of those things, big picture, broad view. So when we talk about that in a football context, that's the exact same thing. So we would always say, especially me as a player, you would look at your younger guys and you see them out there just working. It's like, that's cool, but never work for the sake of working. Have a purpose, set a goal each and every time you're out there. Hey, I'm going to dedicate 20 minutes to my get off. Okay, 20 minutes with the left foot, 20 minutes with the right foot. We're skilled. We're looking for something in particular that we're trying to get better in that day. It can't be, I'm going to get better at my get off. I'm going to get better at my hand place. I'm going to get better at my pad level and all these other things at one time, because it's not realistic. You can't focus on all those things and expect to get better. But if you can hyper-focus and say, hey, this is a skill that we're trying to acquire. This is the skill that I'm trying to improve. Now you can see that growth. Now you can see that development. And that's ultimately what the goal should be for all the players out there, is to develop skill, not just be a hard worker.
No, I agree with that. And as a huge part of this is, like you said, developing the skills. All right, I'm not going to put you to 1. I'm going to give you 2 on this one. All right. So you can't say nothing when I give you 2. Give me your top 2 Steelers you're most excited to see how they look in pads in this upcoming training camp for the next month and a half.
Now you want to take away from the allure of somebody being my number 1 guy.
See, you just got to complain. You just got to complain.
You don't believe this, man. Come on, man. What are we doing here? This is sports. Are we supposed to have 2 champions? Oh, this is champion number 1. This is champion number 2. No, I just want to have 1 champion here, man. But you know what? Since you're going to force me and put all this pressure on me now pick 2 guys that I'm excited to see in pads, I guess I will try my best here. Okay. So, with all of this pressure on me, with all of this, expectation to pick
you and this pressure stuff,
one on defense, the 2 guys that I would say, though, number 1 is Devin Bush on defense. I want to see him in pads. And then the number 2 guy for me that I want to see is, I'll go Mason Cole here. Yeah, and these are the reasons why. So Devin Bush, number 1, I thought that he played well during the OTAs. I thought he flew around, did what he was supposed to do. Him and Miles Jack, I thought they communicated just fine. But to me, that wasn't his issue last year. I thought, to me, physicality, reading against the run, getting downhill, I thought that was his issue. Well, you can't gauge that in shirts and shorts. I can't gauge how much improvement he's had from last season just in an OTA minicamp setting, because to me, I thought that he still moved well last year. I thought that he still ran fast at times last year. But when we get to training camp, we're going to get a chance to see him put it all together, to see if you can read, run, get downhill, to see if you can react to play action pass, to see if you're going to hesitate when it's a double team, to see if you're going to shoot the gap when you got that opportunity. Use your athleticism and be the player that you know you're capable of being. I'm super excited to see that, because last year, regardless of what excuse we want to make for it, it wasn't enough. It wasn't good enough for his standard or for our standards, at least. So that's the part where I'm definitely excited to see with him. But now when you talk about Mason Cole, the reason why I'm excited to see him is this. I personally think that he's definitely going to be an upgrade over Kendrick Green. my biggest thing that I want to see though is versus the bull rush, because there were times on tape with him where he still seemed a little small and gave up a little bit of movement versus some of the bull rush, not to the extent of Kendrick Green, but I just want to see how he's improved that element of his game, because he's a professional. He watches the same tape that I've watched, that you watch, and he's probably watched it a lot more than us. So he's going to identify this and say, you know what, this is the area in my game that I want to improve upon. So I want to see what that looks like when he's out here with this new line. And then ultimately how he is the leader of the group. I mean, as that center, you got to be the one setting protections. You got to be able to talk to a James Daniels on your right and a Kevin Dotson. You have to be able to, number one, be able to know which protection you're going to be in, which slides, whatever it's going to be, and whoever you're working with when we start mixing up these combinations. But those are some of the things I really want to see from Mason when you put those pads on. In terms of Mason Cole, I gotta put the last name.
There are multiple Masons now. Yes,
there are, and multiple Masons with a lot of expectations on them as well, or a lot of eyeballs are going to be on them. But that's what I'll be looking for with Mason Cole, though.
No, I feel you on that. And one on Devin Bush, we talked to him. When he came, and he talked about how he's in a different headspace where last year he was still figuring out how to properly land, when he left his feet, and now he's able to think at a football level. So, I think there's some excitement to see Devin Bush. I certainly want to see how he does in pads, and is that skittishness, that uncertainty that we saw last year on tape, is that gone? Because if it is, I think it changes a lot about what the Steelers defense has to offer. And you're right about Mason Cole. One thing that was noted by Luke, who hosts Locked On Vikings, where Mason Cole was playing, he said one of the biggest questions was, could he get his hands up quick enough after snapping the ball? It was something that he struggled with. Those are going to be some interesting things to see. So that's a very good list of 1A, 1B, or 1 and a 2, however you want to classify it.
I try to go offense, defense. I ain't O-line, linebacker. I'm trying to help out right there. I'm trying to be diverse with my selection. Yes.
I'm glad you're diverse, so that you're open to naming some offensive players. Because normally, if you name offensive players around Moats, he gets upset. He's like, "What you doing?"
I take it personal. I take it personal, man.
We've got a couple more things to talk about. We'll do that right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I'm going to talk to you guys about BetOnline.net. Y'all know about BetOnline.net. It's the number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NBA playoffs. Game 5 of the NBA Finals are tonight, so you want to keep your eyes on that, as well as the Stanley Cup Finals, which are here. We now know that the Tampa Bay Lightning will be taking on the Colorado Avalanche. It's going to be an exciting series. Get all your betting information at BetOnline.net, as well as on Major League Baseball, which is well underway. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Arthur Moats, and we're talking things out here on Monday on the show. Moats, before we get into our next question, I want to go over something that seems to happen a lot when we're at OTAs and minicamp, and something that you'll know as soon as I mention it. Please explain to the audience why every time you're sitting at the table and you're just chilling, minding your own business in a peaceful environment, that head coach Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers comes over to you and yells from a distance, "Jim, you sucks!" He just is relentless about your alma mater. What is up with that, man?
So once upon a time, long time ago, when JMU used to hang with, the little level, the little league of football, the FCS, the 1AA, we used to have what some people would describe as a rivalry between William and Mary, which is the school that Coach Tomlin went to. But at JMU, it was never really a rivalry because we always spanked them. We always let them know who was boss. And it was plenty of times during my era with the Pittsburgh Steelers where Coach Tomlin would have to be decked out in that beautiful JMU purple because of, just a friendly competition about who school would win. But now that we've, risen from those ranks, we've come from the gulag, and now we went from the pit to the palace. Us 1A guys, we don't dwell on that. So he's still a little perturbed. He still feels a little left out. So he'll always come over and try to remind me, "Oh, GMU sucks." And I'm like, "Hey, who do you little guys play this week? I mean, are y'all D2, D3? What are y'all now?" Hey, check this out on ESPN Plus though while you at it, So it's that type of vibe right there. But it's always love, man. That's just one of the things that me and Coach Tomlin have always had. Honestly, when I first got to the NFL, before I even came to Pittsburgh, I was in Buffalo, and just us being from the same hometown, but knowing that about our colleges was always a fun, healthy rivalry, and it was something that really just gave us a common ground to stand on. Part of the reason why I came to Pittsburgh, man, just that trust and that relationship with them. But love Coach T, man. He's one of those guys that he's always going to know how to relate to his players, both current and former.
Yeah, it is really cool to see how he vibes. I mean, there was a day where they had a bunch of Steelers alumni there, whether it was Mel Blount or Ryan Shazier, even at Mike Tomlin. They had guys all over the place. And Mike Tomlin, even if he didn't coach, he's a Steelers alum, and they would all come around. Like he has that respect. He can connect with so many people. Another reason why he's such a great coach. All right, let's move into the actual stuff I wanted to address. This is a question from one of our listeners. Remember that if you ever have a question about that you want to get on Locked On Steelers, you call in to 412-223-6644, or you can email. If you're international, you can't call that number. You can email LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com. Just be sure to put your name, where you're from, and make sure you keep your question to under a minute in sound when you send it. This question comes from Alan in Evansburg.
Hi, Chris. This is Alan from Evansburg. I wanted to ask a question concerning Pressley Harvin III. He was drafted last year, and as he's learning how to be an NFL-level punter, he went through some terrible personal tragedies, and I was wondering, how is he doing today? How does he seem his life is back in order, or is there still some residual effect from what he went through last year? And I was also wondering, how did the Steelers help him out during this pressing time? The team has had some very unfortunate incidents over the last few years, and I was just wondering how the Steelers support their players when they're going through such dire straits. Hey, thanks a lot, Chris. Love this podcast. Take care.
Thank you, Alan from Evansburg. We appreciate anyone who calls in and gives us a question. And that's a very good question right now. We talk about the run game, the defense, the pass game, all the other things, but punting is important as well. And last year, there was a lot of excitement over drafting Pressley Harvin III, the first ever black man to win the Ray Guy Award for best college football punter in the NCAA. But he struggled. He ranked, I believe, 33rd out of all NFL punters last year with everything as far as yards per punt made. But as Alan was alluding to, this was a tough year. That was a tough year for him. He lost his grandmother and his father in a span of 6 days in December last year. And his father's health was struggling throughout the fall, which kind of made it tough to focus on football. It's crazy enough. I wrote about this on SteelersNow.com because I spoke to Pressley Harvin and asked him how he's feeling. And he said that, it's a different normal that he's experienced now. He's had to move on. But part of what helps him move on is that he knows that they're both, those are two angels that are on his shoulder that are watching over him as he moves forward. And he talked about wanting to make them proud. He talked about how, it's been, it did make it tough to focus, but that's one thing that he's worked on is focusing, and how most of his things right now are just all mental. Even he practices focusing even when he's not practicing. He'll work on different things to keep his mind clear. I just wanted to get a sense from you. There was a lot of animus towards Pressley Harvin last year when he was struggling. And I just felt like, man, dude's going through a lot. I get that it's no excuse when you're messing up on a football field, you're messing up on a football field, and you can't excuse that. But there is, whenever I'd say hey man, this dude's a rookie, 2, this is a lot to go through. Maybe don't talk about cutting the dude yet. What was your interpretation of how things went last year and where you see Pressley Harvin going into this season?
Yeah, last year was a heck of a lot to deal with when you talk about the personal loss that he had, but more importantly, when you talk about just being a rookie in the NFL, that is a lot. Monster of a situation to handle in its own right. And then when you combine the two while playing in Pittsburgh, where we know the expectations are heightened, where we know every play matters, every snap that you get matters. Yeah, man, that was a lot for him to have to handle. I thought that he handled it as best he could with all things considered. I thought when he came back for the postseason, for the game against Kansas City, I thought that he showed a way better version of himself, a more consistent and confident version. And I'm hoping that he carries that over this offseason. But in terms of when you're evaluating him and how to determine, hey, man, is this guy still talented enough? Do you shorten this leash? Are you talking about cutting him and things like that? I say pump your brakes. Number one, he has an extremely powerful leg and it's extremely accurate at times. The problem to me is the consistency, and that is normal with any player that you're talking about coming into the NFL, whether we're talking Kenny Pickett, whether you're talking Najee Harris. I mean, we can go down the list of any player that stepped into this NFL level. Consistency is always the first thing that gets brought up. Shoot, even Jamar Chase last year, as all-world as he was, he had consistency issues.
A lot of drops.
That's normal at the NFL level, especially with younger players. So to me, I say you look at the talent, you look at what he's capable of. If he's never given you any plays where you're like, yo, that's an amazing punt right there, well, yeah, you turn the page on him. But we can point to punts multiple times in games where it has been NFL caliber, where it has been exceptional at times. And that's what you say, okay, that's enough for me to allow him this time frame. That's enough for me to allow him this training camp, this season, to see, hey, can you do this more consistently? Can you close that gap of it instead of it being one good punt every 4 to one good punt every 2, or, less than, or however you want to go about that. But that's what you're striving for. That's what you're trying to accomplish. And because of the talent, because you invested a draft pick in him, I do feel that you allow him this time. But at the same time, this isn't a free pass. This isn't a, hey, you can show up to training camp and start working on punting then. No. You start putting in that work now, because when training camp gets here, your job is to hush all the debate. Your job is to make this coaching staff and the general manager look like they know what they are doing by standing by you, by supporting you, by when they had Corliss Waitman, and we saw we saw he was punting well at times. What did they do at the end? They said, no, we're not going to turn the page on you, Presley. We're going to come back to you. They didn't just do that for anybody. They did that because they see something in him. They see something that says, you know what? This guy can be the guy that we drafted. This guy can be the Ray Guy winner. This guy can be our next punter for however many years to come. And that's what you come out here in training camp and you prove. That's what you show consistently every punt that you get come preseason time. And if you do those things, a lot of the negativity, a lot of the whispers about should you keep him or should you not, it will go away. But I do feel like he's earned that right to get this opportunity based on everything that he had to endure last year, but also how he finished last season.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And a perfect example, Pressley Harvin didn't have the kind of season he wanted numbers wise. Overall, he averaged about 42.6 yards on his punts all season long. That was, again, 33rd among 36 people that punted last season. But in that last Chiefs game, he was on fire. He averaged 49.7 yards on 7 punts. So that's a larger sample size. Most times I'd say that you might expect a punter to punt 7 times across 2 games, and not just 1. And the year before, he averaged 48 yards per punt for Georgia Tech. 49.7 would have been the second best average of all punters last season. 48 yards would have put him as the 6th best punter. So, like you said, there is potential. And a lot of players talked about how when they did the punting sessions in minicamp, he looked good. Danny Smith talked about I talked to him and he said, you can see he has the potential there. It's all about consistency. Whether he can get it, that's going to be up to him. But I think a lot of people, I think that another question that Alan had, what did the Steelers do for him? The Steelers gave him all sorts of resources. He talked about that as well as saying he thanked them for helping him get through those tough times and still deal with it after the fact.
Well, and I would say this too. I had a teammate while I was in Pittsburgh. I won't say his name just because I don't think he ever publicly said anything, but he lost somebody that was very, very close to him during the middle of a training camp session, man. And I remember how the team rallied around him, how us as, his brothers rallied around him, but then also seeing how the team gave him the space that they needed, that individual needed to ultimately grieve, to take some time to go home, be with his family and stuff like that. And then allowed him to come back, and they still never had him feeling as if, hey man, your job is in jeopardy. You got to choose between being here and getting better or grieving. And that was the one thing that I always loved about the Steelers and always respected about them. And we could see that even last year and how they handled Presley's situation. But then when he came back, they also did have resources available to him, counseling, anything that he would need to help him out. Whether you talk about comforting, whether you're talking about getting stuff set up for him, they did a ton of stuff. And just seeing that and knowing who he was, it's not like we're talking about a Hall of Famer either. Like, this is just another guy on the roster at that time, but they definitely did a lot to make sure that he was taken care of, man, during that process. So, yeah, they do a phenomenal job, man, of making sure that their players are good on a personal level.
It certainly seems that way. I mean, the efforts we've seen this team give to players like Pressley Harvin, players like Ryan Shazier, there's a respect given. It's Stephon Tuitt, a lot.
Absolutely.
Fans seem to call for him to be cut for months. They, saying like, oh, why are they paying? The Steelers recognize like, hey, you're a human being, and they do put people at a high level and importance in the organization. And that's why a lot of people like yourself talk about this organization like it's a family. It's not just a business. And there have to be business aspects to it. There's tough decisions that have to be made. But at the end of the day, they still remember that they're people, and they try and they want to help you. They don't want to leave you high and dry. So I think that says a lot about the organization. It says a lot about Pressley Harvin that he's worked his way back from it. Now he's just got to say a lot with his foot when he starts putting it to the ball and getting things to work during training camp and preseason. We'll see how he does this year. Moats, thanks so much for joining the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's always fun to have you here on this show, joking around and talking about stuff and getting great perspective from you, a guy who's played in the NFL for so long and a former Steeler who had many great experiences. Let people know where they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Well, first off, Chris, it's always a blast being on with you, man. Anytime I get the opportunity to come over here and join you, I always love it, man. So I always appreciate you for that. But anybody that wants to check out my work, you can check me out on Steelers Nation Radio, Steelers.com, where me and my man Wes Euler do our show Steelers Blitz. And then also on YouTube, man, just type in my name, Arthur Moats. You'll see my podcast up there, the Arthur Moats Experience with Deke, and all of my other media work as well on my YouTube channel. So yeah, those are the two things for me, man.
Absolutely. Do follow Arthur Moats at DeBody52 on top of all of that. Check out all his stuff. If you love the energy he brings now, you'll love it how he brings it every single day on his show. So do check him out. They do a lot of great work over there. Moats, thanks so much for joining us here. I look forward to being on with you guys on SNR soon again, as we reunite the Migos moving forward. Mama! If y'all ain't listening to Steel Nation Radio, y'all need to get y'all lives together and get up on it. But again, I'm Chris Carter. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can read my work at SteelersNow.com, the PittsburghSportsNow.com franchise, along with Alan Saunders and Nick Farabaugh. You can check out all of our work there. You can also listen to this show, the Locked On Steelers podcast, on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're enjoying this YouTube session, please rate us five stars. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Excuse me. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, leave us 5 stars with a positive comment. That stuff helps out. If you're joining us on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You get all of our daily episodes as well as our bonus episodes. They come up from time to time. We'll be back tomorrow right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast with more talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers.